Hi, Paul Thompson here from Spitfire Audio. I've got something very exciting for you today. It's a collaboration with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and it's the beautiful organ of Holy Trinity Church in Stratford, recorded for the RSC for a production of Twelfth Night. The organ is such a useful instrument for scoring, for film scoring, video games, TV work. It's been used in so many different contexts in huge blockbuster films across the years. I mean, one of the most recent, of course, being Interstellar. And it gives you something that feels human because there is air moving. And it's not perfect. And that's why it's such a great substitute for just using a pad or just using a kind of synth sound. It gives you something that really adds life and vibrancy to any part that you play on it. So let's dive straight in, and then as we go along, I'll tell you a little bit more about this incredible instrument. So here we're listening to the full organ with the pedal combined, so you can play across the whole keyboard, and with the reeds in the pedal as well. Now, there's a few funny kind of nomenclatures that we use with the organ, which I'm going to explain in a moment. But first, let me tell you a little bit about this organ. So this is a hill organ, which was built and redesigned a couple of times in the 1800s. It was then extensively renovated by Nicholson in the 1900s. It was fully renovated in the 90s, and then about 2 years ago, a really detailed full renovation was begun by the church, which was finished just before we recorded the organ. So what you have here is as box fresh as you will ever get. So we're hearing something that sounds like strings. This is the thing that I found endlessly fascinating about the organ for my whole life. I grew up as a cathedral chorister. I was a church organist as a teenager. That was my weekend job. And I used to get to practice the cathedral organ at Worcester Cathedral during the night when the cathedral was closed. So I've grown up with a really detailed knowledge of this instrument and an affection for it. And one of the things that I love about it is it is so expressive. It's the original synthesizer. So here we're listening to some flutes. Now, of course, all of the sounds that the organ is making are being produced by air blowing through pipes. I mean, that's all there is. Different types of pipes produce different sounds. And the pipes are organised in ranks, and those ranks are controlled by the stops that the organist can pull out or push in. And that is all about how the organ works. It's about voicing different collections of stops together in the best way for the certain organ in a certain building. And that's what we've done in this library. We've gone into a huge amount of detail with the organist at Holy Trinity Church, and we've sat there and put together the best combinations of stops. We've got a wide variety. And this organ has some of the best sounds and the most comprehensive sound set that I've heard in any church organ. We have flutes, like you've just heard. We have strings. We have the brass. The brass is sometimes referred to as reeds. So you get the idea, but we do also have brass. So we call the brass stops sometimes reeds, sometimes brass. And that maybe has a slightly brassier tone. It's more like the trumpet. And you can hear through the character to what the intention is of these sounds. There's a cornet. And you can hear the contribution of the reeds most clearly in the pedal section, where we have isolated the pedal stops. So you get the idea, it goes down to a really, really beautiful, delicate sound. But you've got the ability to cover everything from the kind of Bach style So it's great. It's still quite delicate, but it does have, it's slightly harder than the basic flute sound. And the most solid sound that you get in the organ, which you would identify as a traditionally organ-like sound, are the diapasons. And these are supposed to be the most powerful version of the flutes. One of the things that you might have noticed me doing while I'm playing is to control the apparent dynamic and phrasing of a line. I'm changing how I'm putting the gaps between the notes. So and one of the ways you get more control over this is a technique called substitution. So for example, I could hold down this chord. And basically, I'm substituting a finger onto a note that I'm already holding down in order to give me the ability to phrase the following notes more accurately. So it's not like the piano where your fingering is just a function of how to make it slightly easier to play a certain passage. It's vitally important that you're able to hold down a note for a specific length of time, and that's why you use this substitution technique. Now, some of these stops are in cases which have flaps on the front where you can close and open the flaps, and that does give you an element of control over the dynamic, and we've reproduced that here in this way. So and I'm controlling that mod wheel control just using my foot on a expression pedal, but you can of course control it on any keyboard using the mod wheel or any other controller that you've got to hand. For the organ, I like to play this two-handed, so I like to use the expression pedal for control. So you can clearly hear the difference there. There is a kind of tremolando effect, which is available here on the Bright. That's a real recorded sound. It's a control on the organ, which can be controlled for certain stops. But here you see one of the really important things that we have the ability to do. So you've got the ability to switch between these different different types of sound, different types of power. And this is what organists do. When you're composing a piece, you can start, this is how you get your dynamics in. You might start with something, and obviously I'm only using the manuals presets at the moment, in other words, the keyboards of the organ. We'll go into the full presets in a second. But what I'm trying to show you is that you can switch between these as you're composing to get the dynamic that you need for a particular passage. So you might start on something like this. Then you might move up to and finally so you get the idea. This is how you ramp up your intensity or your dynamic, your emotion during a performance, and then you can drop it back down again. And what works really, really well, because this is something that you'll have in your head from the organ music that you've listened to, if you're not familiar with the organ, is that the organist will be changing manuals to use different combinations of sounds, but also pushing pistons to change all of the stops at once on specific chords. So you might finish a particular passage, lift your hands, quickly push the piston here to change the ranks of pipes that are being used, and then drop your hands back down again. So it's something that is a very familiar style and sound for organ playing. Now, let's have a quick listen through some of these fabulous presets that the team have put together. And so a large number of these are recorded presets in the room, and then some of them are created by combining our different recordings. And we've built these in certain ways so you can combine them. So you can use, for example, in the manuals, you might use the diapasons, and then you might overlay them with the brass for certain parts as well. But some of these presets give you really great jumping off points. So that gives you a slightly more classical sound. It's slightly less staid than the British Bach. We've got a great preset here for and also a more restrained fanfare. Festive full organ. Final verse is what it says on the tin. Full congregation is a restrained power. It's the idea that you still want to be able to hear the choir and the congregation singing over this. Full fanfare gives you so it's got the sound of the reeds, it's got the sound of that kind of brassy sound, but it's also got some of the higher ranks in there as well to give you a little bit of that extra crisp top sound. Now, the French sound is something that we associate with the further development of mixture stops. What are mixture stops? Mixture stops are stops that add harmonics. So, for example, you might have the 8-foot stop is the stop that plays at concert pitch. So you play middle C, you hear middle C. And then a 4-foot stop, would be an octave above that. So if you add a 4-foot stop, you hear middle C plus the octave above, and so on and so on. But some of these mixture stops, which are often just called mixture 3, mixture 5, TS, things like that, will give you a combination of different other, it might be a major third, a couple of octaves up or something like that. And those really add to this kind of very complex harmonic sound that was very characteristic of the development of these kind of cathedral organs, or big church organs in France. Get the idea. Crunchy, bright, brash and powerful. Really fabulous sound. Something you definitely associate with the sound of Louis Vienne, for example. Now, here we have a couple of different full organ stops. This one has the reeds in the pedal, so the pedal really punches through. And this one doesn't have any reeds in the pedal, so it only has that solid. Glory days. It's a lovely complex sound. It's got that slightly brassy edge to it, but it's really great for doing those kind of harmonic shifts and movements and modal changes. Lighter congregation. This is interesting because instead of adding weight on the top end, where you might interfere with the sound of the congregation singing, a lot of these refer to church hymns, etc., for obvious reasons, you add the weight on the bottom. So gives you a slightly fuller sound. It's nice, but it's not too much. Restrained. You get the idea. We did simple bark and soft flutes. The strings, let's just hear those again. So there's a chorale version which has a slightly flutier edge. And then the ethereal. So 2 different flavours there, and some of these are voiced in different ways because some of the string stops characteristically are more vocal sounding than others. Some are slightly on the, it's getting complicated. If I say on the reedier side, that's with a small r, so for the descriptive sense of what reediness might mean, thinner, slightly more string-like sound. And some of them are on the more human, like there's a stop called Vox Humana. I mean, it gives you something that sounds a little bit more like a human voice. And the way that you can voice these is you can get them to sound slightly stringier or slightly more choral. Now, it's useful to hear what the individual mic positions sound like. So for these strings, for example, here is the close mic. Here are the mid mics. And the far distant mics. So you can hear very clearly how the sound develops in the room. And if we go back to one of our, let's go back to the full organ sound, and we'll put just the close mics up. and the mids, and the far mics. So you get the idea, you get a very different sound depending on the way that you use the microphones and how you combine them. And sometimes that close sound, like for those strings, just brings out the real stringiness of them, the kind of that warmth, that slightly thinner warmth. And sometimes the close for some of these sounds is the crisp crunch, a little bit like when you use the close mics in an orchestral library. The mid always gives you that beautifully developed sound. It's a good position, a good combination of the direct sound from the organ and the sound being reflected from this incredibly beautiful church. And then the far mics give you just that extra little bit of, depth perception. Now, the way that I would program this library is I would probably tend to play the manual parts and then play my pedal parts separately. Or if I'm improvising across the whole keyboard, I'll use a full preset and then I'll separate out the pedals. And the reason that I do that is because when I'm playing the actual organ, I'm using both hands and my feet to play the pedals. It makes you play slightly differently. You play the bass line, if you like, in a slightly different way. It gives you the... you feel more like doing this kind of thing. You do tend to alternate between the hands and the feet when you're improvising. So there are times when you obviously move them together, but it gives you a really great kind of question and answer sort of feel to things. So it's incredibly useful to have those presets where you can play everything across the keyboard, but also you can separate them out. So that is Shakespeare's Church Organ, our collaboration with the Royal Shakespeare Company. The organ recorded and designed for the production of Twelfth Night. It's been a load of fun discovering this organ because it's such a beautiful instrument. It's got such a wide variety of the sounds, the classic sounds, which makes it so useful for lots and lots of different genres. And I think you're going to enjoy exploring this and finding ways that you can fit it into your own music. For me, if I'm not featuring the organ, I like to put it in as an alternative to an orchestral section. In other words, I use it as if it's simply part of the orchestra. You can use it to substitute or to add into the woodwind section, to add into the brass section, to duplicate or replace the strings, and it gives you a huge variety of extra colour to add to your compositions. And it's really great if you blend it in and people are not quite sure what they're hearing. Anyway, I hope that was fun to watch. I hope that some of those things you found interesting and some of those ideas you might be able to take into your own compositional work. Thank you very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.